So a very good morning, everyone. I'm Alexander. I'm joined by Nicholas in this webinar from Malaysia, Research Metrics and Scopus. We'll give it a few minutes for everyone to arrive. And as is customary in such situations, I'll ask Nicholas how the weather is on his half of the island.
It's not so much the weather I'm perturbed by today as much as the constructions that's going on entirely around me. I woke up
Oh,
at 8 a.m. with like lots of drills and construction work going on. That's the
so your
peril of
neighbor,
living in public housing, I guess.
is it the neighbors that are renovating?
It is actually the government that is refurbishing the blocks because I live in an old estate.
Are
So
they going to
that's what's been
refurbish
going
yours
on.
as well?
Yes, they will be in a week's time.
Oh, okay. Well, that's nice.
It is, but it means that I'll be seeing you more often at the office, I guess, the next couple of weeks.
Right. I'll be in the office tomorrow in the morning at least. Okay, so we have 95 participants. We'll give it another minute, but good morning, everyone from Singapore. This is it 1.5 hours? I guess it's a 90-minute, or is it 2 hours? 90 minutes, right? So it's a 90-minute webinar that's all about research metrics. We've got a really quite intense content to present to you today, so hold on to your seats. We're going to try our best to go easy on you and make it understandable. This is customary with a webinar. We're recording it, so we'll give you access to the recording afterwards. The slides we're going to send you as well. You can ask questions either, actually preferable if you ask questions in the Q&A. And I think that's it. So good morning. Nicholas, you want to introduce yourself? Not that
Happy
everyone, I
to.
mean, everyone knows us by now, but
It's all right. It's only courteous and polite to do so. Hi, a very good morning to all. My name is Nicholas, and I'm the Senior Customer Consultant from Core Content. I'm based in Singapore, and this is my colleague, Sander.
yes, I'm Sander, or Alexander for, it's my, well, Sanders for short. My name is Alexander. It's in my passport. Sometimes people think it's two different people, but it's the same. The agenda today is really about research metrics. So we're focusing on the different metrics that exist. What are research metrics? The ones that are in Scopus. We want to demonstrate this. Have you a chance for you to ask questions. We will be providing certificates for those of you that want a certificate. At the end, we'll explain where you can get it. And I guess we'll start with Scopus because this is a training for the Scopus consortiums, right? The 20 public universities in Malaysia. But we're very focused on the metrics, what research metrics are and how you can use them, how they're calculated, to really have you get that understanding. So it's quite a, I would say, slightly more of an academic presentation than some of our other trainings, which are more about features and functionality. And therefore, it's also somewhat complex, maybe, but I don't think you need to remember the details so much as kind of understand the concepts. Believe you would benefit from that. But this is the agenda. And Nicholas, I think you're going to give the quick intro to Scopus, right?
Yep, I'll do just that. Next slide, please. So we always like to remind people that Scopus is the world's largest abstract and indexing citation database. It is source neutral. So one thing that I want to really emphasize is that even though it's owned by Elsevier, we work together with about 7,000 other publishers to come up with the data over here. And we have about a lot of content, entire host of content, about 1.8 billion cited references, over 84 million records, over 18 million author profiles, and almost 95,000 affiliation profiles. The use cases for Scopus has been wide and varied, and we've been covering them quite comprehensively over this Malaysian workshops. This includes how you're able to analyze which journal you want to read and you may want to submit to, how you're able to track and assess a researcher's impact. We'll be covering some aspects of this when we're talking about research metrics today. We'll be discussing about what, where, and whom you may want to collaborate with, how you're able to track the impact of research to monitor global research trends, how you're currently able to identify current research and what has been published in the research area, and how you can determine on how you may want to differentiate research topics and to find ideas. Next slide, please. So one thing that we are able to do is by working together with 7,000 other publishers, we are able to curate all this data set, which are able to indicate research signals, which are easy for people to understand. So we take the whole wealth of data that comes into Scopus and break it down into individual constituent components, right? So, and we group them together by articles, book chapters. We infer the institution contribution, the co-authors, the funding data, and a very key component about it will be traditional and alternate metrics that we'll be discussing in more detail today. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier about how we are able to provision very comprehensive coverage by collaborating with over 7,000 publishers from over 105 countries from 40 languages. One thing I want to emphasize about Scopus is that we don't just only index English journals, we also index journals that are written in their own local language, but a very key part of this is that they need to have their own English title, abstracts, and keywords. So we've been doing backfills to include more historical global content, and it's updated on a daily basis. In terms of coverage, in terms of a global representation, we observe that in Asia Pacific, we have about 2,230 journal titles which are indexed, and this is about 265% more than our nearest competitor. In terms of a global perspective, you'll be able to see that we have at least 75% more than our nearest competitor when it comes to content curation. Next slide, please. One thing that we really want to drive information and content from is for you to be able to identify your research profiles very well. We want to help researchers to showcase your accomplishments, to explore collaborators, and to inform funding and promotion purposes with best-in-class researcher profiles. So you can see that there's many information here. We'll be able to showcase to you the total number of documents published, the total number of citations, as well as the H index. We'll all go through this in more detail in the subsequent slides. Next slide, please.
Yeah. I think before we move on, I just wanted to share my thought that this is a great example of how metrics are embedded into Scopus. If we go back to that kind of complex slide here, you see that there's different content types, but all of the content types everything's linked together, right? So as an author, we'll have a profile. All of the different content that they have is linked to the profile, but that means that metrics can represent the content of either an author or an institution or a journal or so forth. And that can tell you different aspects of the activities and performance of any entity. Again, whether it's a person or a journal or a university or a government agency or so forth. And we will be getting into it in a lot more, but I think the author profiles are just something that people relate to, as a researcher. That's one of the key things that you might look at is your own profile. And there'd be different metrics to understand, but we'll get into the details later. Sorry to interrupt you, Nicholas.
So it's very important to be able to showcase excellence with an array of metrics. Over here at Scopus, we don't just emphasize on a singular metric per se. We really we rely on a whole basket of metrics, so as to speak. The reason is simple. Metrics are a great way to demonstrate your institution's research impact, and the more richer and varied and transparent the metrics, the richer the story that you're actually able to tell. Scopus offers more research metrics and on nearly twice the number of peer-reviewed publications than any other abstract and citation database. We talk about the H index. we'll be talking about the PlumX metrics, and we'll also be jumping into the site score metrics as well as other journal metrics in today's session. And we work together with a whole host of organizations, QS university rankings, as well as Times Higher Education university rankings leverage on our data. Over in Asia Pacific, we work together with Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, Beijing University, KO University, NRF in Korea, as well as TCI in Thailand. Sander, would you like to discuss more about TCI? I think we have a very interesting use case over there.
Well, TCI is a Thai citation index that we've been working with for 10 years. And we've had a partnership with them to be a local board for Scopus to index more Thai content into Scopus, but we also work with other citation databases or citation organizations like MCC, which is now I think called PSI, to get more Malaysian journals into Scopus. So I think that we have a lot of partnerships. I think this slide here is really meant to show that on evaluation, ranking, and reporting context, the data that's in Scopus or the metrics that are derived from that data are used by many big organizations to do important things, whether it's university rankings or it's European Commission or it's OECD. They're doing a lot of things to understand who's doing what and differences in activity levels between countries and universities and so forth. And all of these institutions and many more actually are doing that based on Scopus because it's comprehensive, because it's curated, because it has those metrics for every entity, for countries, universities, researchers, journals, and so forth. But I don't want to bore everyone today with all of this stuff that's about us. I know that we like to talk about ourselves. I think it's customary to give somewhat of an introduction, but I think that we want to try and give a understanding of what this could mean for you. So all of the people out there that have access to Scopus, there's a sea of data. There are a lot of metrics. What can you do with metrics? Why should you care about them? So I think that this section is something that I made 5 or 6 years ago. I wanted to start giving workshops on research metrics. And I found those slides were exactly what I need today. So what exactly are research metrics? Well, we could think of it that the research workflow, so the process of doing research could be represented by 3 main stages. So you would have maybe an input stage or enabling research. So that's before you actually do research. You probably need to have a strategy. You need to either have researchers if you're an institute or be a researcher. Maybe you need to have partnerships with other researchers. You really need funding, maybe equipment and so forth. And then there's the process of actually doing research, depending on which field you're in. That means different things, but you need to, I think all fields, you probably need to keep up to date with the right research content, reading and understanding your field. You might need to collaborate with people, do actual experiments and collect data. Then there's, I think, the process of looking at outputs, which can be shared and can also provide impact. There might be research data that's collected. There might be papers or conference papers or books, book chapters, or different type of publications that are published. Those papers might receive citations or different forms of impact, right? There might be commercialization. There might be different ways of showcasing your success and different aspects of impact. So that's a whole process. It can actually be broken down into even more complex bits, but let's just leave it at this for the moment. So a metric is a numerical measurement that provides some form of quantitative information about something that's happening in any of these stages. It could be performance, it could be amount, it could say something about the nature of what's happening. I've put performance, but since I've made these slides, kind of think it's not only about performance. Actually, metrics can provide you a lot of information about the nature of a field or the participants in a particular collaboration, and so forth. So metrics are used quite often as an input into a decision-making process. So that could be you as a researcher deciding based on a journal metric, I would like to publish in this journal because it's a high quality journal. And you might refer to a journal metric like site score or maybe SJR or SNP to determine that these 10 journals are possible journals for me to publish in because I can see that they're top tier journals. Or it might be a university deciding that they're going to promote someone because they can see based on the number of papers that they've produced and the citations received, and maybe there are other forms of impact. Maybe the research that they've done has led to patents and commercialization. So they might decide to hire a researcher to promote them and so forth. Research is becoming more and more complex. Metrics help to provide digestible insights, right? So Scopus has 85 million papers. There's no human being that can look at that and infer certain things about the characteristics of those papers. But by having metrics that represent large chunks of paper, such as that's produced by a researcher or an institution or a journal, and putting some metrics on it, you can very quickly start to understand key aspects of those entities. And that helps to drive decisions. It helps you to understand the research landscape and what's going on. So it's really there to make us all wiser. And some understanding of research metrics will help us to guide our interpretations and feel a little bit comfortable in this complex environment. Metrics, some of the things that we can do, we can monitor research trends, we can map collaboration networks, we can assess the impact of research funding. So if there's if MOHI is invested in a certain project, they could track, which papers have resulted from that funding and how much were those cited, and has it led to any commercial outcomes or any inventions, or are there any, what's the societal impact? Have there been any medical inventions that are linked to the funding that was been made? Identify who's doing what. So that's very common, right? Author profiles. Identify leading organizations and competitors. So if there's a particular field, whether it's COVID or whether it's tourism or whether it's aviation related, you can see who are the top organizations and people active in a particular field. Assess the international impact of research. So is international research more impactful than research that's not international? Question mark. You could look at it in the metrics. Will give you a lot of insight into questions like that. Here's that process even more kind of complex, right? So I started at the beginning, inputs, doing, outputs. And what we're trying to do in Scopus, in SciVal, analytical services, different solutions that Elsevier Research Intelligence is developing, is to have metrics that represent each stage of the process. And we want to have not just one metric, but as Nicholas said, a basket of metrics. We want to have a basket or an array, several metrics that represent the same concept in a slightly different way, so that you can choose the one that makes sense to you, or you can triangulate by using multiple metrics and looking at, do they kind of correlate? These metrics feed into a narrative. So it's always meant to be combined with sound human reasoning, right? So it's not meant to replace, let's say, human qualitative assessment, but it's meant to enable human beings who understand the concept, understand the context, to enable human beings to make more fair decisions that are grounded in some evidence base. It's what we call evidence-based policymaking. We have 12 principles of research assessment. So there are a number of organizations that have published some very strong principles of research assessment. One is DORA, and the other is the Leiden Manifesto. You can look those up online. So Elsevier signed the DORA agreement, and we're fully aligned with also the Leiden manifesto, and in line with those principles of best practices of using research metrics for assessment, is that precisely that we provide a basket of metrics. So we don't have only one metric. When we generate metrics, we generate them for everyone. So that's why every author that has at least one paper in Scopus has an author profile. We don't have just profiles for some people and not for others. That means when the H index is generated, it means every single author in the world that's in Scopus has an H index. And that way, if you were to do a ranking of authors, it's fair because every peer exists in the data. Because if some peers don't exist in the data, your ranking will unfairly benefit the ones that you have included. So we believe it must be scaled across all of the entities. So that means all of the authors, all of the institutions, all of the journals, and so forth. And that's done in an automated and scalable way. As mentioned already, metrics are not there to replace people. Use judgment with metrics. There's no perfect metric. Every metric has a weakness, so try to use more than one metric. So if you're judging a person, you say, well, this one, this person has an H index that's very high. Maybe you want to look at another metric, like how many papers do they have, or how much do they publish in very, very top tier journals, to get a more balanced view. Yeah, you need to look at what question you're asking. So which metric you use depends on what the question is. And we, Elsevier, nor you, none of us can prevent stupidity, irresponsibility. Metrics sometimes can be used in ways where you think, oh God, like that's stupid. And that's hard to prevent. You can provide guidance, you can provide education. We as a community can try to agree with each other which metrics are appropriate for a given certain situation. No methodological black boxes. So we are transparent about how we measure each metric, and you have access to all of the data. We try not to make aggregate or composite metrics, so we try not to stack things on top of each other. But those are the basic, the most important principles. So what are the main purposes of having metrics? I said evaluation. Let's look just a couple minutes looking in a bit more detail. So evaluating research performance is very common. So it could be evaluation of a researcher, or it could be of a department or a faculty, or evaluation of a university. It's usually carried out, it's a top-down exercise that's being done by an authority. So it could be a funding body or a ministry that is evaluating universities, or it could be the dean or head of a department that is evaluating researchers. So it's top-down evaluation. Showcasing performance is bottom-up. So that means people, it could be researchers, or it could be an institution or a department that is using research metrics to showcase their performance and show someone that we're very good at what we do. Look at these metrics. We're very highly cited. We're very active, and so forth. And that might help them to create a reputation, to get recognition, but maybe also compete for limited resources. So if they're applying for a grant application, they might showcase their performance to prove the point that they're research leaders who deserve to be funded. Some other things, maybe less common, but scenario modeling. You can do some scenario modeling, typically done in something a bit more advanced than Scopus, like Cybel, but you can do like fantasy football. If if these 5 researchers who currently work in different places, if we put them together into a center of excellence, what would their collective research portfolio look like? That is something that research metrics can allow you to do. And lastly, ranking. So simply ranking entities from top to bottom, we cannot resist to do it. Humans, we love to rank things. It's not always a good thing to do, but we do it nonetheless. So there's rankings for universities, there are rankings for journals, there's rankings for all kinds of stuff. There's different ways to do it, but yeah, we love ranking things, and anytime that there are metrics involved, we will tend to rank things. What's the best journal in medicine? Rank it. Oh, these are the top journals, or some of the university rankings that we support, Times Higher Education in QS. Somebody might be sending their children to university and want to understand what's the best university in my region in a particular area. The rankings will help to inform that decision. Types of metrics. Metrics can represent different entities. Researcher. So as mentioned, researcher can have an H index, number of papers. There's a number of other metrics they can also have. Article level metrics, so they represent just one paper. And Nicholas is going to talk a lot about that later, looking at PlumX metrics, for example. So there are a lot of different things that you can understand about a particular paper based on metrics. Journals. So then we have a given journal that you as a researcher might publish in. Journal metrics help you to understand the relative quality or impact of a journal. And there are different journal metrics from site score to impact factor to Schemago journal rank, source normalized impact per paper. We're going to cover a couple of those today. But metrics can also represent a university, a government institution, a corporate institution, a country, a group of countries. There's no end to it. So I think we covered this, that we strongly advise not to use only metrics, right? You need to combine it with qualitative assessment, so human understanding of the field, of the context, and try always to use more than one metric as well. So use more than one metric, and try not to reduce any decision to just say, oh, this one higher than that one, therefore that one's better. You need to also apply your sound understanding of the context and of the situation to make sure that you come to a responsible and correct conclusion. Impact. We talk about impact a lot, and impact means different things to different people. Impact, ultimately, it means something like influence. So if I do something in life, I publish a paper, or I do a research project and it results in a number of papers, and maybe I speak at a conference and I do a project together with people and it leads to a patent. There's different types of impact, and we've mostly focused on academic impact, which might heavily be measured by things like downloads and citations. But there are different forms of looking at that, and Nicholas is going to talk a lot about that in a while. But we could look at different types of impact as well, like promotion and attention buzz. So social media these days, how much are people talking about me on Twitter, Facebook, and so forth? That might tell you something about how whatever you're doing is being received, or the impact it's making. Educational impact, that it's an interesting one. I haven't really thought about a lot. Nicholas, you have your thoughts on this particular category?
Yeah, I think one of the more common ones that I face is the number of plays that we can find on YouTube channels. So in a way, it's almost like a social impact, but it depends on how it's being applied. So the number of times it's been shared on YouTube, for instance, within a library portal. Over in Malaysia, we work with quite a number of institutions. Some of the libraries actually have YouTube channels, and we are able to see the types of courses and workshops that they actually feature. We can see the number of plays, for instance, to see which particular workshop has garnered the most traction as well within its users and audiences. So that's one of the possible other ways that I've come into encounter with.
That's really interesting. Educational impact. Yeah, how is content being used for educational purposes? Societal impact. That's a huge. That's the. I think that's the biggest question that a lot of people have is what's the societal impact of research. But things like looking at citations from clinical documents and policy documents can help to provide some insight into that, but also looking at anything that can link research or research activities to inventions or breakthroughs. So what if there's a medical treatment that changes because of certain research that's done, and you see that if there's data that shows that a certain medical treatment actually has a higher success rate and a quicker or maybe even cheaper. So it costs less, but it's more effective and people are in the hospital for less time. If there's data that's on that, right, if the right data is collected, that might be able to prove the societal impact of a particular group of research. But that type of data is quite hard to come by. What we do have is citations from clinical documents and citations from policy documents, which is something we'll look at a bit later. Commercial and innovation impact can use patents and patent citations. So you can look at what patents have been filed and do those patents reference scientific papers. So if I publish a paper and my paper is cited in the references of a patent, right, then someone who's trying to invent something has filed a patent. Is basically referencing my paper. So they're acknowledging that part of the knowledge that's used in their invention is based on my research, right? So it shows, again, the kind of knowledge transfer from my academic paper to industry or someone that's trying to invent or bring something into the world. So that's kind of data that you can use. So these are a lot of kind of different concepts of impact. So we should not be so simplistic to think impact is just like the citations of a paper. That's like one very small aspect of impact. And yes, a lot of the research or KPOs are around citation-based metrics, but I do believe strongly in the next 10, 15, 20 years, the frameworks for measuring impact as well as KPOs will evolve a lot with these as these capabilities evolve as well. So I'm just gonna here, Nick. This is you.
Sure thing, no worries. So one of the key things that we were talking about impact, like what Sandra was talking about, was that we could demonstrate this through policy citations, right? So the one that you see over here is actually PlumX. We will go into PlumX in more detail in the next couple of slides. But we wanted to just showcase to you how policies from different types of organizations can be seen over in Scopus, such as from nonprofit, government agencies, NGOs, and think tanks. Policy documents that we find that's indexed within Scopus would include guidelines, white papers, monographs, pamphlets, article, books, and more. Next slide, please.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, I think just before we move on, because it's been very intense, right? We're just like unloading all these facts and so forth. I think we just want to get you all to think about this. And we've explained what research metrics are, right? They're quantitative values that represent different aspects of what's happening in research. It can represent a person, an institution, a country, a journal, so forth. So I think the assignment, or what we'd like to ask you to do, is can you think of a use case or a situation in which research metrics can be helpful to either you personally or your university? So you could just write in the chat if you have your thoughts about that. And we're not judging. I think that don't need to be too careful. There's no grades for this, right? Everyone will get the certificate if you stay till the end anyway.
So just feel free to type your answers or your experience, because I've seen that quite a number of you here are quite senior. Type them into the chat box, or preferably the Q&A box itself. We'll take a look at it, and then we'll also share our experience with everyone on this.
Okay, Saeed Hatem Noor says H-index and citations. Sure, yeah, H-index and citations are very useful for both researchers and institutions. Amal says usually it's used to elevate the annual research performance of each academic staff and hence the average of the university. Correct. Research metrics are indeed used to evaluate the performance of academic staff, and they indeed want to raise the average of the university. That's a very common motive and mandate for a university. More like visibility on own self and institutional, yes. So next to evaluation, you have the showcasing element of using metrics to make sure you're visible to the world and say, hey, this is what I'm active in, this is what I've done, this is what I've achieved. How much a paper is being downloaded, because sometimes papers are used but not cited. Excellent. Yes. So indeed, some papers are not cited, but they've been downloaded many times, and that might show you that something interesting about these papers. Citations take years to collect. So if I publish a paper tomorrow, or Nicholas publishes a paper tomorrow, and in 2 weeks we look, definitely it's going to have 0 citations, because the citation will take at least 6 months to a year, probably a year. But if 2 weeks from now I can see 5,000 people have downloaded Nicholas's paper, I would still go and congratulate him and say, something about your paper is awesome, man. Like 5,000 people have downloaded it. So downloads and using different type of metrics is very valuable. Nick, you want to read a couple of these?
Sure, the answers are coming in fast and furious. So this is actually really good. So some people would share that metrics are important as an input to make a decision in terms of the promotion of staff. And yes, this kind of quantitative metrics will be very useful in identifying what he or she would be strong in. And of course, there will be the qualitative aspects, right, when it comes to the interviews and stuff. Another one was sharing that metrics are used to evaluate the research output of the academic staff, as well as the H index of the papers which they are producing. Some would find metrics crucial and easier for funders to provide financial support. And this is something that we haven't quite covered yet in more detail about funding, but we will shortly as well. It seems like the H index is a very common metric that most of the use cases are being suggested over here, Sander. We have one more person sharing with us that H index is leveraged in academic promotion in terms of candidates, and also for the assessor. They need to have a suitable H index to assess the candidates, of course, and it's also used to appoint external examiner theses as well.
That's great. Yeah.
One more use case that people were sharing is that they're able to leverage it to identify journals. And journal research metrics is precisely one of the key things that we'll be talking about today, including how we can avoid predatory journals.
Okay, so this has been fantastic. All right, so someone says, sorry, can you explain the impact factor quickly? We're going to get into the journal metrics a little bit later. But yeah, I think that the impact factor specifically is not the metric that we're going to get into, but we're going to explain site score, SJR, and SNP. And I think Nicholas probably conceptually can explain the difference between site score and impact factor. There's a lot of confusion about that, right? So when people think of a journal metric, they think impact factor. There are in fact several different journal metrics, and we will really explain that in quite a bit of detail later on. So that we have enough time to explain that, we will move on. But really, really awesome. Thank you for participating in this bit here. Those are some really spot on comments. So now we've explained kind of academically research metrics, right? Like what they are and what type of insights they can provide for which types of entities and why they should make us wiser human beings, right? In the information age, there's no getting around it. So now looking specifically at Scopus, what are some of the key metrics? And I think, Nicholas, we're just going to freestyle it a bit here. H index. So here we see one of my favorite people in Malaysia, Professor Norsada. So she has an H index of 32. This is from Scopus. Nick, what does that mean?
Wow, this is actually a deep thing to unbox, but luckily we are in this workshop. So the H index is actually something that it can mean anything to almost anyone. But what it really functions is that it's essentially a good median in a way, the way I would like to explain it. So we can see that she has at least 32 documents with a minimum of at least 32 citations. The beauty of the H index is that it's a much more nuanced metric in the sense that it doesn't take into account the article with the most number of citations, nor does it take into account the entire body of work which the researcher has produced singularly. Rather, it comes at an inflection point, right? So what the H index does is that it's able to tell the quality of research over a researcher's career lifespan. So it comes at an inflection point at a median where it hits between the total number of research produced and according to the quality, i.e. citations of the research work that's been generated.
So it's kind of a combination of looking at output level and citation level. So it's using both. I think typically a person with a high H index is not going to be young, right? So if someone has an H index of 50, you know that they've produced at least 50 papers, and you know that at least 50 papers all have 50 citations or more. So H index tends to correlate somewhat with the number of years that a researcher has been active. But also you could have an older researcher that's simply not active much. So you could have an older researcher that has a low H index, so a high H index. Sorry, the low H index doesn't necessarily mean someone's young, but a high H index usually means that people have a lot of time to have been that productive, and it is covering a lifespan. So H index typically is not looked at for a 4 or 5 year period, but it's usually reflecting the lifetime performance of a given researcher. So it also says something about the seniority. I've seen people very much infer seniority from an H index, right? So that's H index. You can find it on the author profile page in Scopus, and you can link through to the H index. A couple options you can choose. You can shorten the years, you can exclude self-citations and so forth.
The other thing that you can also take into consideration when you're looking at the H index is that you probably want to compare researchers from the same field, because the H index of a researcher in medicine or say life sciences is likely going to be higher than a researcher in terms of mathematics as well. The subject discipline does impact it as well.
Yeah, I think so. That's a good point. So H index is not a field normalized metric. And because it's not field normalized, you have to be very careful if you compare fields which have different citation practices. So if you have a field which is relatively highly cited, like neurosciences, and you compare a researcher in neurosciences to a researcher in social sciences, then the H index, if one had an H index of 10 and the other one of 7, you could simply not say that one is better than the other, because the citation standard is simply a lot different. Field weighting is something that we'll try to explain in a bit. There's a metric here called field weighted citation impact that does account for differences in field citation practices. But Nick, do you want to go over these metrics here?
Yep, I'll be happy to. So one of the key pages that you turn up when you use Scopus at an article level is what we call article level metrics. So what it does is that it quantifies the reach and the impact of published research. And what we have done is that we have incorporated data from sources such as social media mentions, alongside with traditional measures such as citations, to present a rich picture of how an article is being discussed and used. So let's start from the very top. Under Scopus metrics, you'll be able to see that it has about 3 citations, but it's ranked in the 83rd percentile based on its subject category, right? We take a look at the article and we compare to other articles with very similar keywords, and we try to ascertain just what is the impact of the research of this research article. So you have 3 citations. So 3 citations in this particular area of research would not be the same as 3 citations in other pieces of research, right? And this is why the next metric takes and gives you a relevance perspective with regards to this. So this is what we call a field-weighted citation impact. What we do is that we take articles, we compare it to similar articles in, say, medicine, and then 1 is the global average. So if it's 1.69, it means that it's 69% higher in terms of quality compared to other research papers in the field. And the FWCI is a metric which I think it's really useful and really pertinent because it gives you a perspective with regards to the impact that this research article is being able to generate. The next one at the article level metrics is what we call PlumX metrics. It takes a look at citations and mentions in terms of news, in terms of blogs. We take a look at the number of citations it has gotten. That's the more classical and traditional way of looking at a metric. But it also gives you a quick view in terms of the number of tweets, the numbers of shares, likes, and comments on, for instance, Facebook. So we are able to see the social impact with regard to this research article as well.
Okay, we're going to talk more about that later. Here is an example of a paper, and I thought this was hilarious. I was reading the abstract this morning. It's an in-depth analysis of James Bond's exposure to infectious agents. Yeah, so you can find the article metrics on this page here. So you can see here's the number of citations, and if you press this button here, it will open up sorry. So we're going to share the slides with you so that you'll be able to use these slides as a reference. But if you press the metrics button there, then you will get to this part here. And at the bottom, there's a link to view PlumX details, and that will open up a dashboard. And that dashboard has some really awesome metrics that represent the paper. I'm just going to give a bit more on field-weighted citation impact. Field-weighted citation impact is field normalized, so it accounts for differences in practices between fields. So every paper is only compared to other papers that are the same document type and published in the same discipline and published in the same year. So if I publish a paper in developmental psychology and it's a review paper and I publish it in 2010, a long time ago. All right, let's say 2020. So I publish a developmental psychology review in 2020, and I want to know the field-weighted citation impact of my paper. Now, let's say it's a review paper published 2020, developmental psychology. So first you have to know the field average. So you look, in Scopus, you look at the thousands and thousands of papers that are review papers in developmental psychology published in 2010 and calculate that, let's say the average number of citations per paper is 5 citations per paper average. Now, if my review paper received 10 citations, then my paper would have received twice as many citations as world average. So the field-weighted citation impact would be 2.00. If my paper received 2.5 citations, well, I don't think a paper can receive a half a citation, but let's say it's 1 citation, it would be, my field-weighted citation impact would be 0.1. So it would be 90% less than world average. So Scopus, SciVal, like our tools do this automatically. So for any paper is being compared to all other papers that are published in the same discipline, same document type, published in the same year. It only takes the citations in the publication year plus 3 years, right? So if my paper was published in 2010, it would take the citations received in 2010, 11, 12, 13. It would not count citations that come from papers published afterwards. So that's what we call the fixed citation window. Really nerdy bibliometric stuff. You do not have to remember this. You just understand the concept that when you look at this, you see this paper and you think 3 citations. I don't know if that's a lot. You can say it's 69% more citations than world average. That's all you have to know. If this said 0.8, it would be 20% less citations than world average. PlumX, you want to explain these categories?
Yeah. So earlier we talk about PlumX metrics. So what it does is that these are essentially comprehensive item level metrics that provides insight into ways that people are interacting with individual pieces of research output. What it does is that it visualizes scholarly engagement. How it does so is through basically by presenting the data set that you see here in a 5-leaf clover. Reasons because there are 5 categories of metrics, which is used to design to communicate engagement without a score. So green in this case would be usage, which is clicks, downloads, library holdings, and video plays. Purple would be captures, when there's bookmarks, favorites, readers, and watchers. Yellow will be in terms of mentions, in terms of blog posts or Wikipedia links. Blue will be in terms of social media, in terms of tweets, shares, likes, and comments. What else? Red will be in terms of citations. So you know that all these are actually color marked individually in terms of blue, purple, yellow, blue, as well as red. Next slide, please. And this is how it looks like in terms of a 5-leaf clover. If you go over your mouse to the top left corner, we can see that this has a lot of mentions in terms of social media, which is probably because it's a very catchy research title. It's very interesting and it's just meant for you to have fun, right? You can see that this is why there is a lot of shares. There's a lot of mentions in terms of Twitter. In terms of citations, it's slightly less, right? It's not been that cited as often yet, possibly due to the fact that it was published in 2021. It's a fairly new paper. It hasn't really got time to garner in terms of citations as of the moment. But this is one way you're able to interpret PlumX metrics. You're able to see the impact of the research article. And this is actually really useful.
I thought instead of only showing the slides, maybe we'll just quickly show how to get there, because some people I think have said, well, I'm not sure how to get to that page, but I really like what I see there. So whatever your search happens to be, so I'm going to sort by citations to put the highest cited papers at the top. And I'll just pick this top paper here, vaccine hesitancy, definition, scope, and determinants. Luckily, we don't have to talk about this topic as much as we did a year ago, but
that'll be monkeypox.
Right, so yeah. So here we see, yeah, it's cited 1,300 times, 99th percentile. Someone asked, 83rd percentile refer to the article level or the journal level performance. So this percentile refers to the article. It means that this paper is in the 1% most highly cited papers compared to other papers published in the same year and in the same discipline, where we divide science into 330 disciplines in Scopus. So we see that that's cited 21 times as much as world average. It's a highly cited paper. Now, if we go here to view all metrics, it opens the box that we were talking about, where Nicholas is talking about the PlumX metrics, right? And if we want to see that dashboard, there's a button here. And what do we see? We see everything about this paper in terms of, yes, citations in Scopus, citations from policy documents, citations from clinical documents, number of people who've added it to their Mendeley reference manager, the number of news articles that mention the article, blog posts that mention the article, and tweets and shares. So altogether, it gives a very broad spectrum of information about this paper. Policy citations, so all of these you can link through to. So you can see these are policy documents, and these policy documents in the references, it might be published by World Health Organization or UNICEF or so forth. In the references, they're referring to this paper. Same is true for clinical citations. So that's a paper in PubMed, or online newspapers. And this can really include local newspapers, like local Malaysian news. I think anything that's in English, if it's mentioning the paper in the news, it will make that link. So you can link through to read these news articles. Blogs, right? So online blogs that are about science or about whatever it is. If it happens to mention the paper, it will be linked in there. And you could find the Twitter, the tweets, including from the mad tweeting president who no longer is allowed to use Twitter for now anyway. We'll see what Elon does with Twitter, but yeah, you can see all of the tweets. So if your paper is like being tweeted a lot, you'll be able to find the tweets, or if it's been cited by policy citations, by policy documents, or news mentions. So you just need to know to go to the paper and link through to the PlumX dashboard. So it's a piece of cake. If you've not been cited by all of these things, it just simply won't be there, right? So for example, this paper has not been cited by patents, so there's no category here for patents, but if a different paper was cited by patents, it will have that, that category here. Go back to our slides. Nick, so you like the slide, huh?
Yeah, I do actually. So it's one thing to be able to see the individual quantitative value of it, but the question is, how are you able to qualify these quantitative values, right? So we've seen here this author X in 2012 has published this title in this journal name. He has 17 citations, 9 mentioned on Twitters, 125 Mendeley bookmarks, and 2 blog mentions. So this is what you see over at PlumX. And that's the data that you have. But the question is, how do you put this into perspective, right? So with this research article, it has 17 citations, but this places this in the top 5% in economics research in Scopus at an article level. In terms of international impact, you can see that it's been mentioned, bookmarked, or viewed in over 40 countries, according to this particular source. This paper has been covered by 10 media outlets worldwide, including the BBC and the Wall Street Journal. It's been recommended in X and Y economics research blogs and was described in tweets by prominent researcher Professor Jones as a significant step forward in our understanding. So it's not just only important to be able to gather data, but it's also important to remember that this requires a human touch, and you need to correlate the impact of all this data into a relative scale, right? For instance, if you're talking about FWCI, or if you want to talk about citations, you want to put things into perspective so that other people are able to understand the importance of your work.
We're really quickly going to move to journal metrics, but I see a couple questions in the Q&A box. So I'm gonna take one. Noor Adila, why is Age Index from Scopus and other platforms such as Google Scholar and Web of Science not the same? Could you elaborate? Yeah, there's a great question. And the answer is pretty simple. It's because each database has a different set of content that covers, right? So Scopus is a curated database which it selects journals. So journals want to be in Scopus, and we accept some of them, we reject some of them based on quality. So we cover about 25,000 journals, and we cover conference proceedings, and we cover books, but we have selected which ones are included. And that means the number of papers that we see for any person or institution and the number of citations received by those papers is defined by the content that is been included in Scopus. Yeah? Web of Science also selects content. They do it differently than Scopus. They have a different number of journals and content included in Web of Science. So for the same entity in Web of Science, whether it's an author or an institution, the number of papers and number of citations and all the derivatives like H-index and other metrics will have a different value because it represents the coverage of that entity in the particular database. The same is true for Google Scholar. They don't select content, not that we know of. Google Scholar crawls content and indexes it without a curation policy. That's why they include good stuff and also bad stuff. So they might have the highest number, right? Google Scholar might have, for a given author or institution, the highest number of papers and citations, but that might also include predatory content and generally bad quality content because they don't do selection. But yes, their number will be different than Scopus, and Scopus will be different than Web of Science because the number always represents the coverage of the particular database of the particular entity. Why is Scopus a good number to look at? Why we think it's a good number to look at is because we are comprehensive. We cover journals, books, and conferences from 105 different countries, 40 different languages, but we're incredibly strict. So we're really very selective. It's difficult to get your content into Scopus, so it's curated, right? Google Scholar is not curated, so that, yeah, what it's representing is a little bit different. But I hope that helps. If a journal is an S-key, emerging sources citation index journal, is it considered at a Web of Science journal? So first of all, full disclosure, I don't work for Web of Science, right? Web of Science is a Claravit product. My understanding of Web of Science is that they have different collections, and the Emerging Sources Citation Index is one of their collections. So strictly speaking, if a journal is in ESCI, it's in Web of Science. But my understanding is that the ESCI journals don't have an impact factor. So the ESCI, they don't have a journal metric to understand the quality of the journal. So if you're required to publish in a journal that has a certain level of impact, then ESCI probably is not a possibility for you to publish in. But again, because I don't work for Web of Science, I might not be up to date on the situation there. Please ask your librarian or your mentor if you're thinking about targeting a journal and you have certain requirements. You want to go for the top question, Nicholas?
Right. Someone's asking. Sorry, I got it. Someone's asking if sometimes when the paper is already published and available in Scopus, but a couple of months later found that the paper is withdrawn from Scopus, is it because of the quality of paper or else? So that's actually a very good question. So what happens for Scopus is that we do and we run a very consistent journal re-evaluation policy. It doesn't mean that once a journal is Scopus, a journal is indexed in Scopus, it'll be there for perpetuity. It doesn't, right? What we do is that we constantly check and reevaluate. And if the community highlights to us that a journal is of concern, we will investigate it after a while. What we don't do is that we don't retroactively remove articles from journals which are indexed in Scopus unless there are egregious cases in situations of ethical concerns. So that's something that we do. But what we also do is that, for instance, if there's an erratum that is to be published, we will publish all this erratum so that people would know that this paper has a concern that you might want to know more about as well. So these are some of the things that we tackle.
Yeah,
Sander, have you come across?
I'd like to add on to that, so we don't only select journals, but we reevaluate journals. So a journal which no longer meets the criteria to be in Scopus, we can discontinue it. But in 90 something percent of the cases, we keep all of the existing content in Scopus. So your paper should not be removed, right? If your paper was published and it shows up in Scopus, almost always it's just going to stay in Scopus, even if that journal becomes discontinued after the date that you've published in it. Your paper will still be in Scopus, because we believe that the journal met the criteria to begin with. If there's a change in quality, we should stop indexing it from that kind of moment that changes. But we believe that the papers which have counted towards your profile and so forth, we shouldn't be removing things. However, in some very extreme cases, when a journal has been shown to be absolutely fraudulent and done stuff which is ethically really unsound, we might be forced to remove the papers that were already indexed. That does affect some people. There's nothing else that we can do, unfortunately, in those cases. Our advice is always do due diligence when you're targeting a journal, even if that journal is in Scopus. You need to think about, are there any signs of predatory behavior, anything that would be an alarm bell for ethically unsound behavior that might cause this journal to be removed from Scopus. So we try our best to select only great quality journals, and we do reevaluate. We try not to remove stuff. Sometimes we're forced to do it. So while we do really strong quality control, the nature of the environment today is simply that things change so quickly that sometimes a good journal turns into a predatory journal. It might be purchased by a different group of people that use that journal for wrong purposes. So you as a researcher do need to not leave it all to us, but just keep your eyes open as if you were on the street. If someone offers you something that seems too good to be true, like, hey man, you want to buy this brand new iPhone? I promise you it's legit. Just $50, right? If it seems too good to be true, if they're too eager and so forth. So we've done workshops on predatory publishing. I think it's too big a topic to cover today, but that is why sometimes papers are removed from Scopus, because we're forced to do it. We try not to do it. Just really try to be very careful with which journal you publish in. If you're being approached by journals that seem incredibly eager to publish your paper, it's an alarm bell. It should be very difficult to publish in a journal. They should be very selective. There should be a sound peer review process in place. So if they're chasing you and seem over eager to get your paper, really think twice about it. So I would say aim higher. Try to aim high. You'll avoid these problems. Any thoughts on that, Nick? It's such a common pain and challenge.
I think I face it all the time. I think my first incident back in for predatory journals happened back in 2016 when a librarian from UKM reached out to me. And the funny story was that I actually took a quick look at the journal that she highlighted, and I realized that it was a discontinued journal on Scopus, but there's a predatory publisher who appropriated that journal's name and they started marketing it. But one of the best things I will always encourage people to do is to always compare the ISSN, right? The ISSN is a very useful way to verify if a journal is authentic or misappropriated, and I'll encourage people to take a look at it. But yes, predatory publishing is a huge topic. With a couple of webinars coming up with regards to it, I'm sure we can talk to you all more about it then.
Okay, but we're going to move into another huge topic, which is journal metrics in Scopus. So we've covered metrics, academics of it. We've covered some of the metrics in Scopus. One of the important entities to understand is journals, and there are different metrics that represent the quality or impact of a journal. So there's not just one metric, but there are several of them. And we cover 3 of them in Scopus, and that's what we'll focus on. So when you're in Scopus to search for journals, you have to go to sources. It's there at the top by that little orange arrow. And you will open this window that you can search for journals, and you can use a subject area filter, for example. You have 330 disciplines you can choose from. So you could choose one or more categories that fit to your manuscript or fit to, whatever thing that you're doing. Or you could search by publisher if you wanted to see just the Elsevier journals or other journal, because, we have 7,000 publishers covered, but yeah, you can search by publisher. You have got a quartile filter here, and that is using site score. So if you wanted to see just the first quartile and second quartile journals in the fields agronomy, food science, and by publisher Elsevier, then you could do it like that. And we'll try to demonstrate it live a little bit later, because with the slides, it's a little bit messy, but at least you'll have these slides to take home with you. You could also select the source type. Yes, so the quartile, again, it's based on site score. So we don't include the quartiles for the other journal metrics. You can download the entire list of journals and see what the metrics are with this list here. And it's a giant Excel sheet that you'll see a lot of information in.
And this is updated on a monthly basis because we've had a couple of questions coming out in the Q&A chat about it.
So here we see a particular a set of journals. So we see 82 journals related to the criteria that we've chosen. We see, for example, food chemistry is this journal here. And you see a number of metrics. You see site score here, SNP, and SJR. So those are 3 metrics that represent the quality of the journal. For site score, we can see that this journal ranks number 6 of 299 journals related to food science. So you can see exactly how high it ranks. That's basically explaining what I just said, right? So there's a nice orange box that you can take home that's explaining some of this stuff. So these are the 3 metrics that we have for every single serial title in Scopus. Again, we believe in having a basket of metrics, so not just one metric to represent a concept. So if this is the concept is journal quality or journal impact, we have 3 metrics that do it in a slightly different way. All 3 of them are based on citations, but they do it in a different way. Schimago Journal Rank, SJR, is developed by Schimago Lab, which is a bibliometric expert. I think he's based in Spain, and he's got a website, and you can see all the journal quartiles based on Schimago SJR on his website. I'll show you that later. SNP is developed by CWTS at Leiden University. So CWTS are global leaders in bibliometrics, and they developed a journal metric called Source Normalized Impact per Paper. I'll explain it a little bit later. Both SNP and SJR are relatively complex, sophisticated metrics which are field normalized, which means they're a little bit hard to replicate, right? The mathematics is quite intense. Site score is developed by Elsevier. Site score is meant to be more simple, more easy to replicate. You can dig down into the data. The calculation is easy enough for you to do yourself. Do you want to explain site score, Nick?
Be happy to. So like Sanders mentioned, this was developed by Elsevier a couple of years back. What it does is that it's an average of the sum of the citations received in one given year to the publications published in 4 years, divided by the sum of the same publications in the same 4 years as well. So essentially it's citations in a year to documents published divided by the total number of documents, right? Citations divided by documents from the same source medium, right? And we use a 4-year window into account. A very big difference from site score and impact factor, like we discussed earlier, is that while impact factor is citations, it takes the total number of citations from a serial title divided by the number of citable items. So the The source of the nominator is not the same as the source of the denominator, which is why the numbers can be skewed slightly. And also impact factor uses a window of about 2 to 5 years.
And impact factor is based on Web of Science, while CiteScore is based on Scopus. So it's not only the calculation that's a little bit different, but the base data, the papers that are there, and the citations received by those papers is a different universe, right? So impact factor and CiteScore have some parallels. They are essentially an average number of citations received by papers, but the windows are a little bit different, but also the universe of citations that could be received are much different, right? Because in Scopus, the papers of any given journal can receive citations from any of the journals that are indexed in Scopus, which is more journals than Web of Science. Yeah, so I don't think you need to break your brains over like memorizing the calculations and all of this. I think it should suffice to know that there are several journal metrics. If your boss or if someone is saying you must publish in a top quartile journal, the first question on your mind should be, which journal metric do you mean? So if I'm meant to publish in a top quartile journal, like my university says it, or my funding body, or whoever it is, the first thing to agree on is, are we using SJR for this? Are we using CiteScore? Or, clarity on which journal metric are using, because they are a little bit different. And the answer to what is a Q1 journal depends very much on which metric you're using. So that's a first thing to keep in mind. CiteScore, like Nick said, is the average number of citations, but it's based on 4 years of papers, 4 years of citations. We do it for all of the serial titles that are in Scopus. So that's like 25,000 serial journals, conference proceedings, and book series. It covers many disciplines. There's a lot of journals that have a CiteScore, which do not have a journal impact factor. So that's another difference between journal impact factor and CiteScore is Web of Science has, like, let's say 13,000 journals which have a journal impact factor. We have 25,000 titles that have a CiteScore. So there are almost 13,000 titles that have a CiteScore but don't have a journal impact factor. So Scopus kind of has an advantage with regard to understanding and ranking journals, because we include a lot more of them in this exercise. What am I trying to do in this slide, Nicholas? Oh, it's not my slide even. Someone else made these, right? It's our colleague Kelvin, who used to cover Thailand. I believe she made these slides, and I've adopted them. Yes, so we see 3 different metrics representing this journal of international economics, and they all kind of representing journal impact or quality, but in a slightly different way. So SNP and SJR are field normalized. CiteScore is not. So CiteScore 4.8 means that on average, the papers published in this journal were cited 4.8 times as much as world average. SGR and SNP are saying that the world average would be like 1.0. So SNP is saying that the citations received by that journal are 3.17 times as much as the average number of citations received in the related subject areas. SJR is doing a similar thing, so it's field normalized, except SJR weights citations differently. So a citation that comes from a top journal is weighed more than a citation that comes from a lower tier journal, while SNP treats every citation equally. That's the main difference between SNP and SJR. So SJR has something to do with prestige. SNP counts them the same. Both are field normalized. CiteScore is not field normalized. Nerdy stuff. I love it, but I understand if you're rolling your eyes thinking, I don't know why I should know this. Again, I never said you need to know all the details. It does help to understand the basic concepts, especially if you want to have a future in academia. You're being measured using these concepts. It's good to understand the tools that are being used to measure you. Site score, yeah, you could see exactly, like I said, it's simple, so you can dig down to the data. It's easy to replicate. You can see it's these citations that were divided by these documents. You can link through to the citations. You can link through to the documents. You can see the rank. Wow. Nick, help me out here. So
Sure
what's
thing.
going on here?
So the first thing, and I think some of the people were asking, how is it that we do the calculation? So the first one that you see, the first box at the very top, when you see site score 2020, this shows you a calculation of how it's being calculated in the year of 2020, right? We do have a site score tracker for 2021, and this is why we call it an active way to track it, so that you know what's how well the journal is performing as of year to date. So this is calculated and is kept updated and updated on a monthly basis. Now, the beautiful thing about site score is that while we don't normalize it to a global average of 1, what we do is that through the ASJC subject category classification, we group journals based on similar categories together, right? And then we rank them accordingly based on their site score calculation as of 2020. So we can see that the Journal of International Economics with a site score of 4.8 is ranked 31 out of 288 other journals in the finance category, in this category of economics, econometrics, and finance. Likewise, in a separate subcategory of the same area in terms of economics, econometrics, and finance, it is ranked 86 out of 661 other journals in economics as well as econometrics. So in this case, what you're able to see right now is that you're able to see a ranking of journals within a similar category, and you're able to compare them to one another based on site score journal metrics. And this gives you a very nuanced understanding of how well the journal is performing.
Fantastic. We could also see the rank of journals in a particular field. So for example, here it's the category finance. You'd be able to rank all the journals and see this particular one. What is this journal? Journal of International Economics ranks number 31 of 288 journals, but you could see that the number 1 journal there is the Journal of Management and so forth. So depending on what field you're interested in, you could look at the whole list of journals in order of their ranking according to site score. So someone asked, how do you categorize quartile based on site score? So top quartile is from 99, 100% to 75%, and quartile 2 is from 74.9% to 50%, and so forth, right? That I think that's how quartiles work. It's the top 20. Quartile 1 is the top 25% highest quality, highest scoring site score journal within a discipline. I hope that the way that quartiles works is clear, and it's the same actually for any journal metric, the way that quartiles or percentiles work. So we have quartiles, but we also include the percentile. So within the quartile, so within the top 25%, you would be able to see which one ranks, highest to lowest. That was probably not a great way to articulate it, but yeah, there's a compare sources feature that has been moved to the advanced document search, apparently. Did you know that, Nick?
Yeah, you could do it that way as well.
And
so
that
the
means, yeah, go for
both of you. The compare sources basically allow us to showcase some of the metrics that we have discussed with you, so that you can set up to 10 journals that you want to compare. So this gives you a good clarity in terms of identifying how well the journal are performing in relation to one another. You can set the years of comparison. You can choose 10 journals that you want to compare. You can choose SJL, SNP, total number of citations per year, total number of documents per year, the percentage of review articles by year, and my favorite, the percentage not cited by year.
Very good. We have just 5 minutes left, so we're going to power through some of this. You can do all these comparisons. So if you have like 5, 6, 10 journals that you want to compare, you can compare them using all of those metrics that we've looked at, including some indicators like Nicholas said, like what are the percentage of papers that were never cited, or the percentage of reviews that have been published by that journal. So again, it's meant to help you to understand the relative quality of the journals, but also how much they publish, how many papers are never cited, right? And whether they're relatively focused on review articles or not. I'm not going to go through this calculation. I mentioned to you that SNP is source normalized. So again, it is basically similar to field weighted citation impact. You can see if a journal is cited more or less than the world average for its field. And the field is not a simple field. So the Lancet is not just like medical fields. The Lancet's field would be defined as based on the categories of the journals which are citing the Lancet in a given time period. Scimago, I mentioned, weights citations from prestigious journals more than others, but it also weights citations from fields which don't cite as much as more. So if you're receiving citations from Arts and Humanities Journal, which doesn't cite much, right? So if a given journal is only citing twice, then arguably each citation is 50% of its value, while if an entity or journal is citing a lot, each citation only represents a small percentage of its citation. So anyway, citations are weighted differently in a Scimago journal rank, but we don't have time to go through it. And I think it's a bit much. We've already covered some quite intense topics today. 2 minutes left. I'm gonna just go very quickly to Scopus to show you that if you're on the landing page, Scopus, and you want to do journals, we go to sources. And again, you have different filters here. So subject area, I might choose cancer research and cell biology and apply. And I'm going to see 698 journals. If I'm using site score, I might say, well, I'm told that I must publish in top quartile journal. And I'm told that my journal must be open access, then I can choose that. I'm going to apply. I'll see there are 55 journals that are quartile 1 and open access related to these fields. And then for any of them, if I open it up, I'm going to see the site score, the rank. If I wanted to really see all the journals, you can see the journal I'm looking at now is number 1 in histology, but if I'm more interested in cell biology, see that ranks number 16th in cell biology. So it's all super transparent data. It's just meant to help you understand the differences in quality between journals. In some cases, there's a link to the homepage of the journal. So if this journal interests you, you could go to the homepage and read about the instructions for authors and what they're looking for. But you might actually consider first looking through the documents, right? So if I look here and sort it by date, I could read through, look at these articles and see which topics they're publishing in to get a sense of whether, my manuscript would have synergy with what they're publishing. That's just to give you a really quick live demo. We're really at the end of today's training. So we thank you for asking a lot of good questions. I see a couple questions we haven't answered, but we're going to just go and put up the certificate page. So if you want a certificate, you can get it via this QR code or this survey link here. You have to have the workshop code. So please remember this code. Please take a picture of this slide if needed. This will link you to a page where you're asked to fill in a survey. It takes 3 minutes. You're rating our performance. Elsevier takes this very seriously. So if you could go easy on us, you know, like go gentle on us in the ratings. We hope that today's webinar was helpful to you. I hope that we've answered some of your questions at least. We will be happy to schedule up follow-ups. I think that's it. I've talked a lot, so my voice is getting a little bit tired. I'm going to look quickly at the questions. Nicholas, you go ahead and please entertain our guests further.
I would do just that. So for everyone's convenience, I've pasted the survey link as well as the workshop code for you to access. So just click on the link and copy the workshop code. It should help you quite a fair bit. In the meantime, as we send out the slides and the presentation, we will share with you additional resources that you can refer to in terms of additional content that you'd like to access. So we'll give it a couple more seconds for you to take a snapshot of the survey and certificates before we showcase to you the additional resources that we do have.
All right, I'm just going to leave this page here for another minute. Again, I will make a PDF of these slides and it will be sent to you, I think 24 hours from now. And I think we'll also include the link to the survey and the link to a recording of this session in that same email. It will automatically be sent by Zoom, so it's not from me. Any questions can be directed to Nicholas. No, I'm joking. You can email me as well. I tried to send them your way. No, we're really happy to answer questions. I think we covered most of the questions today. If we miss anything, apologies. Other researcher tools. So there's some resources. Nicholas is really good at these. I'm not as familiar with them. We have other sessions. So we've covered now the first 2 sessions of our webinars that we've planned for this year. So these are the other ones. Again, we're sending the slides to you tomorrow, so you don't need to have this now. Nick.
So the one that I want to bring your attention to, actually, Sandra, can you go to the next slide? That one would have more links as well. So I want to bring your attention to the Scopus Support Hub. That one is actually a really powerful repository. So in case you have additional questions about how you can use Scopus, as well as additional information that you like to look for in Scopus, just simply type Scopus Support Hub. Yeah, this one is actually really powerful. You can even type in Scopus Support Hub on Google. So Elsevier has basically SEO'd its content very well. So when you type in Scopus Support Hub, it brings you directly to the right place. We also have a Scopus blog that you can go to for additional updates, as well as Scopus Twitter, with a couple of additional sources like the Scopus Librarian Guide, as well as a certification program for librarians. So over here, you'll be able to find additional contact points for Sandra, myself, and our other customer consultant over in Malaysia, Benny.
Yes, you can email Benny as well. If you know Benny, then feel free. I think that's the end. So it's we're a few minutes over time. Again, we have more webinars planned. Borders are opening. We will also be traveling to Malaysia, and we hope to see some of you in person whenever that makes sense. And until then, take care. Thanks a lot for attending, and see you later.
See you all later.
All right, bye-bye.